You've said there is probably not as much room for development as the Mercedes, but what's Adrian going to be thinking about the 23 modifications to the regulations? And he will have known about those since August at least, if not earlier.
Yeah, I mean, the discussions about the changes to the floor have been long since debated, and it's the sort of thing that he tends to actually understand quite well. It's one of the, the great things that Newey is good at, is just understanding the impact of a change of regulations, and these are specifically aero, but equally some other changes over the years. He's been very insightful in getting that right. It's one of the great aspects of him as the lead at the team. So yeah, I mean, I think they've kind of found that middle ground, which no one else did. They had the downforce, they had the low drag, they had the tyre management. They equally have a fantastic engine, maybe not the most reliable, but certainly better than the Renault and Ferrari. So they had everything right in the middle. So where do they go this year? They had incredible top speed. So I would imagine if I was Newey, I'd be looking to try and find more downforce from that car, and whilst keeping, that low drag setup. So he's going to have to work, the floor edge and the side pods to get that whole package working. I don't think he's going to make any change in terms of the philosophy. Relatively high ride height. I don't think he'd be tempted to bring that back down. So I think it really is refinement in that sense. I don't think we're going to see a radical change in that car.
We saw a number of teams, probably all the teams, struggling with the packaging and everything else involved in getting the cars onto the minimum weight limit almost from race one. Where do you think it was by the end of the year, and how big a part of the development program going into 23 is weight saving going to be?
Well, it's massive. I mean, Red Bull started the season, as the clear example, quite a lot over the weight limit, probably more than 10 kilograms, probably even more than that at some stage, which is, if you could look at all the ways you can improve the car by 1%, one of the things that you could do is make it lighter. Obviously, the regulations give you a minimum, so there's only so far you can go. But once you're over it, it really hurts you, probably more than 1% of aero performance or 1% of better tyres. So they were overweight, and that was a big problem. They lost a lot of weight quite early in the season with the first set of updates that they fitted to the car, and the car was still overweight. Yeah. This is what gave them that key crossover with Ferrari quite early in the season, probably also helped with their tyre management as well. But the car throughout the year was overweight. They did have a plan to introduce a lightweight car with a new tub for, I think it was specifically for Verstappen. Then everybody spoke about having both. That never came to pass, and I think, again, that was what we saw, the budget cap coming into force, that they couldn't spend that money in making all of those parts and developing those lighter parts to get that car right down to the minimum weight limit. So again, one of the things they can do over the winter is get that car down on the minimum weight. And I think most teams probably will do by next year, because they've got a fairly simple set of regulation updates. There's not much that's going to add a lot of weight, probably some of the changes to the roll hoop for quite a few of the teams, in fairness. But otherwise they should have.
But have they not increased the minimum weight with the roll hoop changes?
I think there was a small allowance. I can't remember the figure off the top of my head.
I think it's relative.
But that would be the same for everybody.
So the big question again, I guess, around Red Bull is, won the Constructors Championship. So obviously they've got the performance penalty with the aero, and they've got their other penalty and a budget cap. Well, it's not a budget. They haven't got a budget cap penalty, have they? They've just got a big fine.
No, they've got a fine, which I believe doesn't come out of the budget cap, which would seem.
So the budget cap for next year is the same, but they've got a double whammy in terms of aero. Now, how much is that going to hurt Adrian Newey and his pen on the drawing board?
That's going to hurt them a lot. It's going to hurt them in one of two ways, or probably a little bit of each. Is early season development, mid-season development of the RB, what are we, 19, next year's car. So how that car improves through the year will be limited, but also a lot of that,
because it goes through to the first 6 months of the year, doesn't it? Halfway point.
And then they'll be doing the concept work for the next car after that, the 24 car. And they're going to have to work out, where are they going to spend their hours between this year's car and next year's car, and that will probably be something that will evolve depending how good the 23 car comes out as, how much competition they've got, and how much they want to think about 24. So it's don't get it wrong, that's a big loss for them. And as we kind of got through this first year of the regulations, the development curve is very steep. And it's starting to flatten out through next year as teams, have made their second big concept stab at the regulations, which would be the 23 car, and developing that through the year. So I think it will really hurt them, because it's at that point when that development curve flattens off, is that every one of those runs is looking at tinier things to make improvements, not, you know, big changes like we saw like with the side pods earlier in the season. So it's really going to hold them up.
I suppose we could argue that if any team's going to suffer that sort of penalty and kind of survive, it'll be Red Bull, based on the building blocks they've got from the 22 car. I mean, if you gave that penalty to Williams or to Alpine or even to Ferrari, dare I say it, it would hurt them exponentially more, probably. Yeah,
I mean, it would. And, you know, if it's one of those things that, you know, the regulations are kind of aimed at bringing everyone together. And that fine, you know, has brought them perhaps even closer, maybe a bit quicker than Red Bull would have liked. So, yeah.
What was your view on that fine, or that sin committed by, if that's the right word? Did it effectively make, in your mind, did it make the 21 car illegal?
No, I don't think it made the car illegal. The problem I've got is that we never really saw, I mean, they say the things that they overspent on, you know, catering and Dan Fellows and, you know, all these other bits and pieces that they had to spend. But what we didn't really see is how much R&D did they spend in the year, and how does that compare with all of their competitors? Because really, if you look at the cake that you've got to slice up in your budget, you know, you've got all of these kind of operating costs, and then you get your R&D costs. And I would imagine most of the teams probably apportion them fairly similarly across that $145 million. So I don't really know whether Red Bull did spend more on development, but blamed it on other costs, rightly or wrongly. I think the eventual overspend, again, I'm never really quite clear what the figure was. Really clear, was it 1.4 million, or was it rounded down to 0.4? If it was 400,000, I mean, you know, I mean, it's But it's an interesting point you make, because I was talking to another team principal before, once it was clear that Red Bull had done something. He said, I can tell you what will happen here. They will do the quickest possible settlement with the FIA, because the biggest penalty for them would be if that information actually got out, how they were slicing their cake, because they don't want anyone to know that. Exactly. And that is the biggest secret in Formula One, isn't it? How the teams actually operate in terms of R&D versus everything else. Yeah, no, it's, I can remember, I know Christian Horner was caught with some paperwork at the Brazilian Grand Prix quite a few years ago, and he was talking to probably Bernie and Helmut Marko, and had a bit of paper, and it said operating 100 million, R&D 150 million, which we suggest then their budget was 250 for the year, and that felt about right. So, you know, maybe 100 million of that, you know, capped budget is on the, you know, the design, the development, and the manufacturing of the race car. The rest of it is operating it and the rest of the business. And of course, there's no overlap at all with AlphaTauri. None. Technical overlap. There is some, and it gets very complicated very quickly trying to explain it. So there are parts of both cars which are developed by Red Bull Technology, which is the kind of the upper company, and those parts can then be sold to both the teams. Yeah, I know all that. But tell me about this. Tell me about this phone call. This is Adrian Newey to Jodie Eddington. Jodie, when you ran those additional fins at the back edge of the floor last week, I'm just interested to know, did you find it was good stuff for you? And he's thinking, but we didn't run them. I know what he's saying. Yes, Adrian, yes, they were. But we need to go back in the tunnel and check them again. How would you police that sort of conversation? I don't think you can. Well, that's the point, isn't it? This is part of the problem. I don't know if those conversations go on. From speaking to, you know, the various technical heads. I'm sure they all say they don't. I think sometimes when you're chatting to engineers, you sometimes can tell when they're saying, we don't have those conversations, as opposed to, no, we don't have those conversations. So I don't think there is, but it's, you know. Well, I'm sure they don't have those conversations over WhatsApp, but they might have them around a water cooler when nobody else is around. Yeah, but probably so does every F1 engineer. I'm not saying they don't. Again, I'm not saying they don't, but when it's Adrian saying that, it's slightly different to somebody else saying that, you know, because, and that's part of the, to me, it's part of the imbalance. You know, we've got this incredible policing of the budget cap, of penalties and aero testing, and the restrictions on aero testing. And on the other hand, we got a team owning another team. And it's not only Red Bull, of course. You know, Ferrari own Haas, don't they? Effectively, so they don't own Haas. They have a lot of interchange with Haas, don't they? Yeah. And Mercedes, bless them, don't. But then Mercedes Powertrain is a huge operation, isn't it? Yeah, but equally, who knows Mercedes, what goes on there in the water. Mercedes do supply listed parts to Aston Martin, so that they have a crossover as well. So you know, I think it's just, you know, part and parcel of the game of Formula One. Really, I don't think you can hammer every kind of potential chat.
So Red Bull, great building block from 2022. Adrian was known about the 23 regs as long as everybody else, but for Adrian Newey, that's quite a long time. On the other side of the coin, the aero penalties are going to hurt them for sure. Engines, well, they've done a good job, haven't they? Managing the Honda program and taking it over and really moving forward with it. Where would you put them in terms of power unit performance this year?
I mean, I think in terms of, I always say there's lots of measures of an engine, but in terms of power, what everyone likes to hear about, I would say Mercedes, Honda and Ferrari are so close as to, you probably couldn't tell them apart. Renault, I think, are slightly a step back, but I think they have other issues. Ferrari may be slightly a step back on that because they had to turn their engine down a little bit to maintain the turbo while they developed the solution to the reliability problems, which still seem to be there for Ferrari. They can all make reliability changes, but I think that Red Bull power unit, the early failures weren't really in the power unit, they were in the fuel system, weren't they?
Yeah.
So I think Honda just keep doing what they're doing.
Split turbo?
Honda split turbo. Mercedes obviously still split turbo. Renault went to the split turbo this year. Ferrari, in my opinion, and I still haven't seen that perfect picture that totally proves it, I've still got the rear-mounted turbo. So they can't change that now until 2026. In fact, they can't change it for 2026 because the rules demand a rear-mounted, closely coupled turbo anyway. So maybe Ferrari have a little advantage in 26 in that respect.
Good point.
But tiny benefit. We know that Red Bull Powertrains, which is get it quite accurate, this is the Red Bull team's Milton Keynes engine factory. That has already got a test engine running. So we know that the Red Bull Powertrains have got that working. Then you've got Honda. Now, this really depends on which whispers you listen to. Honda aren't currently a power unit provider directly into Formula One. They have the Honda engine, which is run by Red Bull Powertrains. For 26, my understanding is Honda are still developing a 2026 engine. And this has always been the case with Honda, with various projects with Mugen and all their other guys over the years, have always kind of kept a development path going. I would suggest that they would have ready for 2026 a competitive engine for the new regulations. Whether they choose to introduce it or not is a boardroom decision, but I think the technical people will have everything ready to fulfill a boardroom request to have an engine ready for whoever would be running it.